Hi Earth Science students, welcome. I'm going to do a quick review video today. We have reached the end of Unit 1. Unit 1 covers an introduction to Earth science and a little bit of scientific method, as well as some historical information about how we've kind of come to know the things that we know about our Earth and how the planet works. So let me walk you through these review items. You can always come back to this video either as you're taking the unit test, or maybe you've taken it, you didn't do as well as you would like, and you're preparing to retake the unit test. You're welcome to do that, and you can use this video as a way to help you. First, I'll talk you through each of the topics that are on the test, then I'll go through in some more specific detail what exactly you need to know about those topics. And remember, I'm available during office hours every day, 11 to 12, to help answer your questions. So let's get started here. One of the things that the test will ask you is, what are the things that an earth scientist studies? So it might give you some examples and ask, like, in comparison to what a biologist studies or in comparison to what a chemist studies, what are the things or topics that would be of interest to an earth scientist? The next kind of topic that you'll be asked about are, what are some of the ways that we determine the age of the earth? So in the past, earth scientists or scientists in general thought that the earth was very young. We discovered new technologies, we discovered new ways of measuring the age of the earth, and we've now come to the conclusion that the earth is much older. The earth is billions of years old, and we know that based on different pieces of evidence. So I'll explore that with you in a moment with what some of that evidence is and who came up with those ideas, but that's a topic that you'll be asked about. You'll need to know about the scientific method, how it works as a process, how it's a way of taking an idea, testing that idea by gathering data, and revisiting to see if your idea was supported or not supported by the data that was collected. You'll need to know about Kepler and what his main ideas were, as well as the scientist William Smith and what his ideas were. Again, I'll go through those in the next slides here. And then Earth's different spheres and what its interactions are. So that's some of the things that we covered in class last week. Let's go through them in a bit more detail now. So taking a look at the scientific method, as I mentioned, it's an ongoing process. It's usually started when someone makes an observation. So we have an observation about the way something works, something that you see or notice in nature, and want to understand why it does that. So we think of a question based on why, maybe a certain pattern of the stars, forms the way it does. The next thing a scientist would do is make a hypothesis based on that idea, develop a way to test it. So what could you measure that would tell you how that thing is working? Once you've gathered your data and tested your prediction, we can either make a theory that kind of puts all of those ideas together, or if the data didn't support our original prediction or our original hypothesis, we can refine that hypothesis and we can come up with a different way to test, and we can kind of go through the process again. We are always, as scientists, coming up with new questions. So we have new data when we explore those new questions, and then we go back and we develop theories that are hopefully supported by more and more significant data all the time. So that's an idea of what the scientific method is and how it is used in earth science specifically. The age of the earth is something that you'll be asked about. So we have a couple different things that we talked about during class. Originally, people were looking at kind of information from the Bible or information from old texts to say, here are lineages, here's how long humans have been on the earth, and so if we look back so many generations, we can imagine the earth is X number of years old. Well, there might have been data that showed us that that wasn't quite the case. In the 1800s, this scientist William Smith began to look at fossils, and he noticed that maybe fossils that were found near each other might be from the same age rock. So he would conclude that rock layers that contain similar types of fossils, maybe even if they weren't close to each other, those rock layers would be of similar age. Kelvin is another scientist that you might remember if you've taken chemistry, and Kelvin took a look at the age of the earth based on the temperature. So the very core of the earth is extremely hot, and he made calculations based on how long it would have taken if the whole earth started at that same temperature. How long would it have taken for the earth to cool down over time? He arrived at an age of 98 million years. Eventually, we came up with technology that helped us do radioactive dating. Sometimes it's called radiometric dating. And based on looking at the radioactive decay of different elements within rocks, we've calculated that the Earth is more like 4.5 billion years old. So radioactive dating is a method of testing the age of rocks, and rocks have been on the Earth ever since Earth existed, and so we can use that to calculate the age of the Earth. One thing I mentioned was Earth's spheres. They're not all spherical in shape, but we call the different systems that make up our planet the spheres of the Earth. So we have Earth as the center, and it's composed of all of these different parts. One of them is the atmosphere. So all the air that surrounds us is part of our Earth. It has a certain composition. There are molecules in the atmosphere that are important for our breathing. There are molecules in the atmosphere that are important in different parts of our life processes. So atmosphere is one of the things that makes up the Earth. The hydrosphere is all of the liquid water components. That includes oceans. That's, covers a major portion of the Earth, the oceans, but it also includes rivers, lakes, streams, ponds, and other sources of liquid water on the planet. Sort of opposite that, but also including water, is the cryosphere. This is all the frozen water on the Earth. So we have lots of water that's frozen. It's trapped in snow or glaciers, these kind of ice mountains that can be found around the planet. So cryosphere is another one of the spheres that has an influence on the Earth and how it changes over time. The geosphere is probably what you think of when you hear the word Earth. It's the rock or the solid portion. So it's the part of the Earth that you stand on. Some of it is soil, some of it's actual rock. Underneath the oceans, there's the ocean floor. That's considered part of the geosphere. So that's the sort of solid part of the Earth. And then finally, the biosphere. So we are living organisms. Plants are living organisms. Bacteria are small, but they're also living organisms. They make up part of our Earth system. We, as living things, influence the Earth, and we influence different parts of the Earth. Some of the test questions from the Unit 1 test will ask you to compare the influence between these different systems. So biosphere and atmosphere are ones that have a really obvious connection. Plants are part of the biosphere. Plants do photosynthesis, so they take carbon dioxide gas out of the atmosphere, and then they produce oxygen gas and put it back into the atmosphere. Just the presence of plants in the biosphere changes the composition of the atmosphere. And so that's one example of how these Earth spheres can interact. Another one might be the hydrosphere interacting with the geosphere. You can have rain that comes down. So rain would be part of the hydrosphere, and it can erode the sand on a beach. And that might be a change to the geosphere. So all of these spheres interact with each other and produce changes that take place on our planet. I mentioned Kepler and Smith as two scientists that you need to know. Kepler studied the planets and he studied planetary motion. He came up with the idea, so once we understood that Earth orbits the sun and not the other way around, so the sun is in the center of our solar system, Earth and the other planets orbit around it, Kepler realized that based on some mathematical equations and based on sort of increased technology in how we make those calculations, that the orbit of our planets is not perfectly circular. It's actually a little bit elliptical in shape. So Kepler's scientific laws describe the elliptical motion of the planets around the sun. Moving along to William Smith, we're talking about this William Smith down here, not this one at the top. William Smith studied rock layers, and like I mentioned earlier, he concluded that rock layers that are that contain similar fossils must be similar in age because those fossils lived at a similar time. So, two different rock layers that both contain Tyrannosaurus rex fossils must have come from the same time because Tyrannosaurus rex only existed at a certain point in Earth's history. So by looking at fossils and comparing rocks, and that's something we'll explore later this trimester when we look at relative dating. So that's everything that you need to know for being successful on your Unit 1 test. What are the things that an earth scientist studies as compared to other fields in scientists, how we determine the age of the Earth, how the scientific method works, what were Kepler and William Smith's big ideas, and how those Earth, sphere, and systems interact. Please reach out if you need help or have any questions. Keep up the great work, and I can't wait to see how you do on the test.